Hello and welcome to a Friday night live show. Travis is traveling, so he's unable to join me for this live show, but be sure and post your questions, down there in the question comment section below, and we'll try and get to them as soon as possible. A lot of news, I guess, to go over today so far. You'll notice that I have not been doing quite as much traveling, and that is because of my special guest over here hanging out on my desk. And, she's been occupying little bit of time. Let's just put it that way. So, you won't see me quite as much on travel events, but obviously I'll still be doing all the usual weekly reviews and hopefully trying to, keep things on track as far as the channel goes. So let us know if you have any questions about baby items, because, apparently we will be doing a lot of baby testing things here over the next, quite some time, I guess. Let's point up, see, Mr. Angel. That is a good question. When will the Silverado and Sierra debut? We haven't heard any specific rumors, but my guess is that we will probably see them this fall. What exactly we're going to get, that's been anybody's guess right now. We know that General Motors is working on a next generation series of V8 engines, but they haven't implied whether or not they will be ready by now. That is an interesting question as to whether we'll get the trucks first or the engines first or them both together. As we have seen in some vehicles, especially in the pickup truck segment, they don't always debut at the same time. So I would guess that we probably will see a Silverado and Sierra first, and then we will see the new engines in that new Silverado maybe a year later or so. Ford's really guilty of doing that, for instance, in their half-ton trucks with that sort of unusual cadence there. Let's move along here to Elizabeth's question. Of all the cars you've driven, do you have any favorite models? This is a tough one. I will say that when you do this long enough and you're driving everything all the time, they kind of all blur together, and things maybe are less special than you thought at the beginning. Brand allegiance is one of those things that definitely goes out the window, because you see how much really in common all these vehicles truly have from so many different manufacturers using the same transmissions, the same suppliers for components. Manufacturers may have a reputation for, that manufacturer has bad transmissions or bad electronics or whatever, but they're the same transmissions and electronics used in a wide variety of products that are quote unquote reliable. So it is an interesting thing that there is so much in common, really, and so much common development with manufacturers these days as well. Let's move along here to thoughts on the Ford hybrid system. I think that the Ford hybrid system is actually a really well done hybrid, in that in the F-150, they're advertising it primarily as a work duty hybrid system. So there are fuel economy improvements, not huge, but they are there. But largely Ford seems to be selling them to people that are interested in the power offboarding ability of the hybrid system. And I think that was really a masterstroke, and something that the other manufacturers have been strangely slow to replicate, because you can take your F-150 to a job site without taking a generator with you. That saves a lot of space in your bed. It obviously saves you either having to fill that generator separately or having to tap into your gas system in your truck and possibly void a warranty, etc. I know a decent number of service companies out there that I've worked with in the past that have this conundrum with portable generators, with other small engines that are driving other utility devices, for lack of a better term, in vans or in trucks. And the Ford hybrid system really solves that by being able to supply quite a lot of power to these devices. I'm surprised that we don't find that system in the Transit, actually, because that would be a really big advantage for fleet customers there as well. You can run well pumps, you can run welders, you can run, actually really quite large industrial motors, as long as they're single phase, with that hybrid power setup there. And I'm surprised we don't find something similar in a Ram, for instance, especially a Ram with the Hemi V8, because it all comes with eTorque now, and that eTorque system should be able to deliver 5,000 to 6,000 watts continuously, but no other manufacturer has really tried to make that there. Questions on the redesigned Highlander. That's a good question because a lot of rumors have been out whether are we going to get a redesigned Highlander? Are we not going to get a redesigned Highlander? Is it coming? When is it coming? We haven't had any strong good news on that one. Let's go to Matthew here. How many years till GM finally releases new plug-in hybrids? I would say we're still probably a solid 2-3 years away from there, because when GM said that they were going to bring them back, they didn't have anything in development, and they thought that the ones they have in China weren't a direct replacement for American tastes. Also, they're made in China, so that's a problem, especially today with the current tariff situation. So not only does GM need to completely engineer and redesign the vehicle and the hybrid system for North America, they have to get manufacturing capacity back in North America for these systems. And that's generally a 5-year process plus. If you really expedited, a manufacturer really expedited things, maybe 4.5 years, but we're still talking about a really long lead process here. So go back to when they first announced that, add 5 to 7 years. That's probably where we're going to be. Let's move on here to some vehicle questions here. MDX TypeS or X740i, which would you choose for quietness and body roll? I have to admit, I would go X7. There is a pretty significant difference in refinement, I would say, between an MDX and an X7. There's still a pretty healthy, although smaller, difference in refinement between even a Volvo XC90 and the X7. The X7 and the GLS are really nicely done. They're very comfortable, but you're going to pay for that extra level of comfort and refinement. There's kind of a reason that they're in a different tier price-wise. MDX TypeS, being the top-end trim of the MDX, pushes that delta a little closer, a little smaller, but you're still paying an awful lot for, or you're still paying more for the refinement that we find in those other models, I would say. Let's see here. Someone is asking us about a 2025 Subaru Outback or Forester. Read conflicting opinions about how reliable they are for 10 years of ownership. I would say on the longer term ownership cycles, reliability and maintenance are going to be lower on, lower reliability and higher maintenance costs than something like a RAV4 versus a CRV. That's a little bit tricky because the CRV has had some stumbles with that 1.5 liter turbo and, of course, the CVT. The Outback and Forester, the two things that would be should be kept in mind would be the CVT, its longevity. It generally seems that even Subaru and Toyota and Honda CVTs, even though they are among the more reliable CVTs, longer term reliability seems to still be lower than the stepped automatic transmissions that we have typically found from Toyota, for instance. The other thing to keep in mind is that the Boxer engine designs will always burn more oil, and there is the possibility of more expensive maintenance costs long term on those engines versus an inline engine. They're just mechanically more complicated because you have two heads, you have two gaskets there on each side. So there's just a bit more to leak, a little bit more to go wrong on those engines. And especially these lower friction sleeves and rings that we find in modern engines, and the lower weight oil, the really thin oil that we find for efficiency, that definitely seems to lead to different long-term consequences, not all of which are well understood necessarily at the moment. That's part of what we saw going on with the GM V8 explosions that were happening. It appears to be an oil weight issue, that maybe they should have been using higher weight oil, which would have been a little bit thicker, a little bit better on the protection side there. So let's move along here to the question of Mercedes dropping the turbo fours for inline sixes and V8s. I will kind of believe this when I see it. I don't know if we're actually seeing the end to that AMG system. I know that there have been news reports out there saying that yes, it's over and it's being replaced, etc. I would, however, be surprised if it was wholesale replaced versus just finding its way into different models and then bringing back inline sixes and V8s and other vehicles and other models. Mercedes has been kind of cagey actually about the future of that system in everything. So I know that they had said that the plug-in hybrid 4-cylinder was sort of the future of AMG, but they didn't give any timelines. They didn't say, you know, is this going to be in an S-Class AMG? Is this going to be in a G-Wagon, etc.? So it could be that maybe they were hedging their bet development-wise and still had some other things in development. We'll probably know more based on how quickly some of these other AMG formats come out. Yes, I've seen the X7 spy shots. I'm not sure how I think about the look, but, you know, I'll wait to see them in person. Let's see here. Thoughts on the Nautilus. Oh, interesting. Salesman lied about it being manufactured in China. I'm going to go ahead and guess that a lot of salespeople don't know where things are actually built, but I've always kind of liked the Nautilus. I think that I liked Lincoln's marching to a different drummer thing more than the Me Too thing that we see in Acura, in Cadillac, similar extent, maybe perhaps Volvo, etc. But when we look at Cadillac and their SUVs, I think they're really trying to copy a little bit of Lexus, a little bit of this, a little bit of that in their SUV lineup. Of course, they're all being discontinued except the EVs now, so maybe that doesn't apply to Caddy anymore. But Acura, for sure, in MDX and RDX and ADX, they're just sort of going after the generically sporty, generically more luxurious than the average model in that lineup. And Lincoln is kind of going off script with something that is decidedly comfortable. They tend to tune their vehicles much softer than the others, whether that's the Corsair or the Nautilus, or even to some extent the Aviator. They're softer, they're quieter, they're a little bit more cushy, comfortable, not quite an American land yacht, but you know, in the 21st century, it's about as close as we can get. And I think it kind of works for Lincoln. The hybrid system's pretty efficient, but it's not as quick as you might hope based on its power profile. And that did surprise me. I had really expected that turbocharged hybrid to deliver better 0 to 60 performance, but in reality, it's not far off of hybrids that are making 40, 50 horsepower less. The made in China thing, that is kind of a personal decision. We don't know what Lincoln is going to do about the Nautilus longer term, because the tariff situation is really going to be a problem for them long term. There has also been discussion about maybe the tariff trading scheme getting shot down. It appears that right now tariff trading is still a thing. And what that means is that for every Lincoln that Lincoln builds in the US and they ship to China, they can bring in a Nautilus from China without paying a tariff on it. And Lincoln does manufacture vehicles in the US, so does Ford, manufactures vehicles in the US, sells them in China. And the last time I checked, they were making more vehicles in the US than in China, reverse, you know, shipping back and forth wise. So that should allow them to import them without the tariff burden, but details are sketchy going forward about exactly how that's going to all sort out here. This is a good question on the Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer bringing back the Hemi V8s. I don't think that they will, because in that segment, it doesn't seem like there's as much customer interest in the V8 in those vehicles, because Ford sells a ton of Lincolns and Fords, of course, without a V8 option at all, and it doesn't seem to have affected them. Also, I think in those vehicles, the performance and the nature of those engines just suit the vehicle better. It seems that even though they are rated to tow quite a lot, the average person in a full-size SUV does not really tow a great deal, certainly less than the average truck owner claims they tow. So I think that it's a bit less of a problem, I guess you'd say, to not have a V8 in that model. Let's see here. What feature do you miss most? Left off or unavailable? CarPlay, blah, 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 blah. Ooh, that's a good question. I would say on the EV front, CarPlay, the lack of CarPlay definitely offends me. And GM tries to justify this up, down, and backwards. But same with Rivian as well here. Any manufacturer that's deleting CarPlay, it just means, and with it, mind you, Android Auto, it just means less customer choice and less customer option. That's the pity. Especially when manufacturers like General Motors want to pull out that specific line, customer choice. This is why we still offer this, and this is why we do that, is because of customer choice. Well, if you really gave a crap about customer choice, then how about we bring back CarPlay, since a huge percentage of new car shoppers claim that that is a feature they absolutely want. The rationale is simple. They want your data. And if you want, and that's the double-edged sword here, if you want really reliable mapping and range data, then you do need to be using the factory navigation system. But if there's one thing that I definitely miss in the Blazer EV that we have for, I guess it's going to be about another year here or so, it is certainly CarPlay and that lack of CarPlay there. So let's see here, move on. Oh, this is an affordable car question here. A lot fewer affordable new cars from sale in the U.S. Car makers love to make huge expensive EVs. Are new cars under warranty only for rich folks? You know, the sad and unfortunate commentary here, John, I would say, is that the truth has been, actually for quite some time, that the rich bought the new cars. Even the affordable cars were being purchased by people that could have afforded a significantly more expensive car. Rather sadly, the middle class, especially the lower middle class, doesn't buy new cars. And that's kind of a pity, because if they did buy these affordable cars, they would still be around. It's the chicken and egg thing. Nobody was buying the affordable cars, so the affordable cars sailed off into the sunset. And that has always struck me strangely, that demographically, the buyer of a Nissan Versa and a Porsche 911 are an awful lot closer than I think a lot of people think. These people that are buying the affordable cars, they have just started gravitating towards the more expensive cars, even though they were always buying those and could have afforded something more expensive. It's a very odd one there. When will we be able to test drive the new Nissan Leaf? My guess would be it's going to be probably 3 to 4 months at least. I was not at the launch. Travis went to the launch, so he might be able to tell us more when he is back in town. Let's move on here. Long-term reliability Hyundai Tucson with a non-CVT transmission. Generally speaking, the Hyundai and Kia product lines have done fairly well in long-term reliability lately, although long-term is difficult to talk about with a brand new product because, of course, they haven't been around long-term. But the data that we do have on 3-year-old vehicles approximately, and maybe a little bit older than that from Consumer Reports, JD Power, et cetera, indicates that transmission issues are not terribly prevalent in the Hyundai and Kia vehicles. They have had some engine troubles here and there. Transmission issues with their dual clutch transmissions, that does seem to be an acknowledged misstep. They've even acknowledged it themselves internally. The main thing with them would be they have the long powertrain warranty, so I would be less concerned in the average ownership cycle on a Hyundai or a Kia product with that long powertrain warranty. Ditto goes really with, some of these other manufacturers that are also offering longer powertrain warranties regardless of their reliability reputation. So Mitsubishi, long powertrain warranty. Ram now, long powertrain warranty. So definitely a reason to buy one of those. And those powertrain warranties do seem to be pretty decently honored by manufacturers. There are always stories about things going wrong. If you take your car in for service, you follow the letter of the rules, etc., you shouldn't really have a problem in most areas. There's always going to be a dealer that may try and screw you over, but by and large, those things generally seem to be honored well. Let's move on to a super chat here. Thanks, Drew. How is it that BMW X3 M50i gets better fuel economy than the new Tiguan? Does a 48-volt mild hybrid system make that much difference? The key thing to remember about a luxury car is that the manufacturers can spare a lot less expense at incorporating all of the latest active fuel-saving technologies in their engines. So, BMW is constantly refining their engines in their vehicles, especially their 3-liter inline six, which I have to admit is a fantastically efficient engine in practically everything that it's been in. The Grenadier that we own currently has 8,000 miles on it now or something like that. Not a lot, but it has been averaging around 18.5 miles per gallon, which I think is truly fantastic, given that it is a 6,000-pound brick. And there is nothing aerodynamic about that thing at all. No active aero, no underbody treatment for aero. It's incredibly tall. It is significantly taller than a Wrangler. It is much bigger, I think, than I think people realize. It's as wide as an F-150, boxier with a worse aero profile than any F-150, except maybe the Raptor. And the fuel economy is strangely good. So really efficient engines. The other detail there is that we also get really efficient transmissions. That ZF 8-speed automatic transmission is really, really efficient. We also then have the ability to completely disconnect the front differential in that model based on the design of the transfer case in modern BMWs and most modern rear-wheel drive SUVs. So that definitely helps there. And then, as you point out, we do have that 48-volt hybrid system that also helps out as well. So everything put together, the active aero shutters, all that jazz, really helps out a lot. And a lot of these features, especially the dedication to active aero, smoother underbody panels, all of those details that you find in luxury cars that helps out fuel economy, they're small returns, but together you do end up improving fuel economy by these numbers. But they're small enough improvements that it doesn't necessarily make sense to jam them all on a vehicle that's a lot less expensive. When we take a look in a sort of a lower end vehicle, we see something similar. For instance, in the Chevy lineup, you have the 1.2 and the 1.3 liter turbocharged 3-cylinder engines, and one is significantly, well, not significantly, but notably more efficient than the other. And it's that expense. So they delete a lot of the variable pressure pumps and things like that that you find on the other models. They're just deleted in order to achieve the efficiency features that feature efficiency numbers that you want there, basically. Move along here. Why doesn't Toyota sell the 6 different trim levels of LC300 in the US like they do in Australia? I have always wondered this question. And I do not quite understand it, to be honest. Toyota has really hiked the price on the Land Cruiser through the roof over the years. And this is part of why the sales just fell through the floor. Sales numbers fell through the floor in the US. It just got too expensive, especially with the Toyota badge on it. And then they inserted the smaller Prado in the lineup for the United States. And they realized that it just made more sense for the American customer. If you're going to be paying $100,000 for your Land Cruiser, just stick a Lexus logo on it, sell it to the Lexus dealer, makes more sense. I get that part. But then I do wonder why they didn't fully flesh out the lineup of Land Cruiser in the middle with the Prado. We don't get the non-hybrid, we don't get the diesel, which I think would be fantastic. I actually experienced the diesel Land Cruiser recently in Colombia. That was all kinds of fantastic. I really wish we got that here. I think they could have filled out the lineup a bit more, but the truest answer to the question is probably simply that Toyota has over SUV'd themselves, and there are still rumors about more SUVs coming from Toyota, because we have 4Runner, we have Land Cruiser, we have Sequoia, we have the GX, and we have the LX in the US. I just don't, and I don't think there's room in that lineup for yet another thing. They have really turned into the General Motors of the late 1990s or early 2000s, where GM had an SUV for every brand for every occasion. I think that they just realized it had gotten a little out of control. Let's move along here. So, big fan of the lightly loved Volvo S60 B5. Wants to know about this versus the Honda Civic. Which one is more fun, and are those reliable? What would I pick? Well, I would pick an S60 any day of the week and twice on Sunday, but it is not going to be as reliable as a Honda Civic hybrid. And that is the tricky bit. When we're talking about fun, I think there are multiple layers of fun. The Civic is definitely fun. It's cheap, affordable fun. The fuel economy is going to be great. The handling is really solid there as well, but it doesn't feel premium in any way. The Volvo is going to be more comfortable. It's going to be quieter. It's going to have a better ride. The turbocharged engine is, I think, just really well done in the Volvo. It has gotten significantly smoother depending on the year we're talking about. In the S60, I think it looks fantastic, but comfort, technology, the badge, the logo on the hood, all that is going to be one reason to buy the S60. But I would say get an extended warranty. Buy a CPO, get an extended warranty on it. Repairs after your warranty is over will be luxury car and cost wise. So there's very little daylight in the cost of repairing a Volvo or a BMW or an Audi or a Mercedes. Mercedes is a bit more, but these are all in one realm by themselves. And Acuras and Lexus are a tier down from there repair cost wise because of the large commonality of components in most of those models with a Toyota or a Honda. And then we have the mainstream brands, which are going to be cheaper to repair simply because of volume. There's just so much more volume on those models that, if you need a new alternator or a new belt or whatever, they just make so many more of them. Whereas on the Volvo lineup, yes, there's a high degree of parts commonality in those engines, and all the Volvos use the same basic 4-cylinder engine, but they just don't make nearly as many of them as the average mainstream brand. So let's move along here to another question here. Toyota making the RAV4 more mainstream is going to increase competition for charger spaces at work. I am going to be interested to see how many plug-in hybrids they really sell, because I have a theory that if Toyota really gave a crap, that the RAV4 plug-in hybrid would be the best-selling plug-in hybrid in North America. It logically should be based on its specifications. It's quick, the range is good. I think it's a really well-done plug-in hybrid system with very, very few compromises. There are a few, but very few. The problem has always been that Toyota just doesn't believe in them that much. And so I think that they're probably still going to be limiting production to well below demand and desire. Also, if the lease corporate credit ends in the United States, then we probably will see a pretty healthy drop in sales of all plug-in hybrids. Right now, the leasing loophole is really important because it's a corporate thing. If you're a corporation, regardless of what kind of corporation you are, and you buy a green vehicle, regardless of where it is made, plug-in hybrids, battery electrics, etc., hydrogen vehicles, you get a green vehicle tax credit for the corporation. Now, most leasing companies pass that leasing credit on to you in the form of either reduced capital cost or some other reduced cost in the lease, etc. The trouble is that if that goes away, all those cheap lease deals on plug-in hybrids and EVs will also logically go away because they don't need them anymore. They don't need the credits anymore because the credit schemes are probably also going away. So that's an interesting question as to the future of that. Let's move along here. Which car is best for car seats? That's an interesting one too. It depends on whether your kids are in the forward-facing or rear-facing position. Look at combined legroom numbers for the first and second row. You're really going to want a vehicle for a rear-facing child seat, especially some of the larger rear-facing child seats. You're really going to want something over 81 inches of combined legroom, preferably towards the 84, 85 inches of combined legroom. And a lot of other car reviewers that I know scratch their heads when we talk about combined legroom, like, well, why is that important? Because they want us to look at rear seat legroom or front seat legroom. Remember, front seats move in pretty much every car that is sold in North America today. I can't think of a single one that has a fixed in place front row. So depending on where you have that front row, that's how much room you have left in the rear seat. Now, cautions here. Not every manufacturer measures second row legroom the same way. Manufacturers, Ford, are known to cheat now and then. There is a standard for an ISO and a SAE standard, a DIN standard as well, for how you measure legroom in these various positions. The generally accepted process is you put the 80th percentile male dummy up front, adjust it where the feet are flat on the floorboards, pedals, etc., and then you measure legroom in the second row with that front row in that same position, and you leave that front row in that same position as well. Or you can push the front seat all the way back at the 100% travel position, measure it there, measure the space behind. Doesn't matter which way you do the measurement. This will give you an idea of how much space you have between the front and the seat back of the rear of the vehicle. And that's really critical for rear-facing child seats. Now, the other thing I would say is pay attention to the width of the rear bench. You want a rear bench, especially in the shoulder area and hip area, as wide as possible if you plan on putting multiple people in the back, including an infant that's suddenly deciding to wake up next to me here in the back. So that's also a critical dimension. If your kids are forward facing, then pay attention to vehicles where you can tilt slide that second row with the child seat latch anchored into place and still easily access the third row, because that's going to make using that third row so much easier, even versus the walk through the middle arrangement. I have always been surprised by vehicles that are overtly family targeted, especially every minivan in North America, except for the Chrysler minivans, that don't have that particular feature. And I know I've been talked to by Honda Odyssey fans left, right, and center. They're like, oh, the magic slide seat, the magic seat this, the magic seat that. I've tried it, and the magic seat is lovely in some situations, but it's still not as convenient as the articulating seat mechanism that we find in some of the other vehicles that are out there. Third row access is significantly easier when they articulate that way. Now, of course, if you're doing extended rear facing, then all bets are off, because it's really tight there, and there's no good way around that other than just, going off to the other side. Let's moving on here. What vehicle specific features from the past would you wish for comeback in the Acura lineup? This is an interesting one. I didn't think pause, the passive all-wheel steering system, was really that big of a deal in the Acura lineup. I just thought that was a lot of nonsense trying to compensate for a less than elegant front suspension design. That's just my thought. But what I really wish Acura would bring back was that really fantastic hybrid system that lived for a really short time in the MDX. I am perplexed that Acura has been so resistant to hybrids. They continually tell me when I ask them about this that the reason behind the no hybrids in Acura lineup is they don't think it fits with the sporty image of Acura. But I loved that dual clutch hybrid system. I thought that was all kinds of fantastic, and it was really innovative if they had matured it to another generation where the motors were smaller and lighter, maybe the battery was bigger and more powerful. It would be a really cool thing to say mate that system to the single turbo engine that we find in the current MDX. How fantastic would that be? In the platform design that we find in all Acuras, the larger Acuras, I should say, not the small ones, but like RDX, MDX, TLX, etc. That platform, because it's transverse engined, front wheel drive bias. Sorry, I'm holding a pacifier in my hand here. Because of its design, you're never going to be able to put as much power in that drivetrain as you will get in a BMW, Mercedes, Audi, etc. The transverse drivetrains just don't have the cooling capacity. They don't have the room for larger and stronger gear sets that you find in rear-wheel drive vehicles, except if you electrify it. That's how Volvo gets to 455 horsepower in their vehicles, because that's the way out of that limitation. And Volvo's refinements and progression has proved that this can work well. It's never going to be a rear-wheel drive vehicle. The Volvos, they're lovely, whatever, but they're never going to perform and handle like a BMW or Mercedes. But they get an awful lot closer than I think most people realize. And they have the benefit of great efficiency, decent packaging, all those other efficiencies you get with transverse designs. I think Acura could really work that into a new product line, and somehow I hope they do, but we don't know exactly what the future holds there for that. Let's move along here. Wish we could do a car review on longevity perspective using high mileage examples, different channel for car already reviewed in the past few years. This is something that I've always thought would be interesting, but getting the vehicles, knowing their service history, that would be tricky. And without that service history, it's hard to make good comparisons because you don't know what that other person has done to that vehicle. Let's move along here. What is the white black thing above the white license plate starts with AT? No, that's a thermostat for the air conditioning in this office. It's one of the Ecobee things because for some reason they put the thermostat for a whole huge number of offices in this building here in this room, and it's not really very telling of the temperature in the other occupied offices. So that one lets you have remote thermostats in the other locations over there. So move along here. Anxious for a test drive of the heavily revised Subaru Outback. Have we scheduled this? That drive program should be coming up here soon. I don't have it on the calendar, but we will be doing it, and we will get that to you as soon as possible. Dates are tricky. It's probably going to be Travis that's going to be doing that video because, again, I have someone here next to me in a basket, so that's limiting things. SUVs and sedans, which is easiest accessed for child seats? That's a good question because this really depends on your personal ergonomics as well. The taller you are, the more I would lean towards an SUV. The shorter you are, the more I would lean towards a sedan, because it really is just going to be, how far do you have to lean over to, heft your child up in and out of the child seat. That's tricky. And door clearance is a problem as well, because I think every parent out there has bumped their kid's head at least once or twice on the handle to the child seat, if not the door opening, the sill opening in the car, because it's inevitable. They're especially modern SUVs that are lower and slinkier. Pretty much every sedan with that really accentuated fastback shape that's become so popular. It's just difficult to get kids in and out, especially if you're using a car seat with the base station, the dock bases, because those add a significant amount of height. And that's something that I think is also critical to keep in mind, is if you're installing a rear-facing child seat, especially an infant seat, you're not going to be able to do anything about those convertibles. But an infant seat, if you need more room for certain vehicle types, you can remove the base station and just install the child seat using the shoulder belt. Now, there is not a lot of data on this, but by all appearances and the anecdotal data that we have been able to get from car seat manufacturers, mind you, it is safer generally to install the car seat with the base station, whether you're following the shoulder belt path or the latch anchors, because the way those base stations really fit in more tightly in the vehicle versus the especially the lap and shoulder belt paths on some of the child seats. Also, you are not going to be able to do the anti-rebound leg and some of those other design features that we see in those base stations. You can't do that if you are using without the base station, because that's part of the base station, the dock itself. So that's something important to keep in mind there. Very strong TARDIS vibe. I don't know if that was what we were going for, because if I were really TARDISing, I'd want some circles in the back for a more classic Doctor Who. Any rate, full size 3-row. This is a good question, and I think it would depend on what you're looking for. I think the Navigator is my least favorite in this segment. I like the big screens in the Navigator, above the system that we find in the Grand Wagoneer, but on a comfort level for the third row, the third row in the Grand Wagoneer is significantly more comfortable and larger than the others. So if you're really using that third row, I would go there. The Grand Wagoneer also has the ability to tilt slide the second row for child seat access, if that's of concern to you. Ride quality, Escalade, I think, is the best. That adaptive suspension system where we have the combination of Magna Ride plus the airbags, that is truly fantastic in the Escalade. Navigator, not as comfortable. The Escalade, I think, has the nicest interior design in the front for me. I really like the OLED screen. The wood trim in that model is just really nicely done. I think they did a very good job with the attention to detail, the elegance of the front area. Second row back, I would then go back towards Grand Wagoneer. So it's going to depend on your use case. The Grand Wagoneer, if we're not talking about the extended model, the Grand Wagoneer is bigger than the other models, so you do get a bit more room here and there. That's part of why we find that more accommodating third row. If you are looking at the extended models, keep in mind that the GM SUV triplets are the only ones that move the third row back. So if you are wanting extra leg room, mind you, headroom is still going to be limiting, but if you want extra leg room, the other extended wheelbase models, the cargo area gets bigger. In the Escalade, the cargo area gets bigger and the third row moves further back. So it gives you a bit more room there as well. Thoughts on picking up a used SC430? Any advice? The later updated models or the Pebble Beach versions worth it? I probably would go for as late of an SC430 as I could get. I have never been a fan of the look of the SC430. I have always preferred the pre refresh model, because I mean they were all kind of related, mind you. But the pre-refresh model from, what year was this? The early 2000s, basically. I always thought that looked better to my eye than the post-refresh model. It was a little too bubbly for me somehow. Maybe that's because I've always liked the LS400 a bit better than the LS430, but that's just my thought there. Moving along here. Current crop. Oh, here, this is an interesting question. I like this one, Kevin. So, rank the current crop of off-roaders from best to worst. Now, if we're talking off-road capability, I would say off-road capability at their core, the lowest in this list would be the Toyota models. So from the factory is important here too. From the factory, 4Runner, LX550, those are lower on the list because they lack the really dedicated off-road software that we find in some Land Rover models, etc., some Jeeps, etc., but mainly because they don't have a front locker, they don't have an adaptive height suspension system. So those are really going to limit some capability there. They don't have as much power as some of the competition as well, and sometimes torque is important. So that's something to keep in mind. Then we would find the current generation Defender, no front locker in that model that I am thinking of, unless I have forgotten one. So no front locker there either. That would basically go for Land Cruiser as well in that bunch. Then we get the R1S, and this is going to be somewhat controversial. The R1S is really quite capable, but no true mechanical locker in the quad motor model, which is what they're billing as the most capable in the lineup. We do have the adaptive height air suspension system, which I think is fantastic, and it is very, very capable. But part of the reason I would rank it a little lower than the others is because of the amount of trail damage that it does. Any quad motor EV, any tri-motor EV, actually honestly, a lot of dual motor EVs that don't have true lockers, they're going to create a lot of damage to the trail because you have to slip a wheel before the system can think, oh, there's nothing happening there, we need to send power somewhere else. These vehicles don't have stepper motors, so it's not like the vehicle can command each wheel to rotate at exactly the same rate. They're trying to apply power to the motor on the wheel that causes it to spin up if there's nothing there. It's difficult to control wheel speed in these situations. They're going to have to use the brakes to try and actuate things. The brakes will end up becoming overheated, etc. over time. Those are really important factors. Then I would say the average Wrangler and Bronco are pretty similar in terms of capability, as well as the base models of Grenadier, and that's because the front locker is not standard. So for some reason, I think this is a really missed opportunity for Ineos especially. I think by the time you've worked your way up from regular Wrangler pricing to G-Wagon and Grenadier pricing, the front locker should be standard, and it's not in the Grenadier. Odd twist. You have to select that option box. I think that almost all Grenadiers actually sold in the US have the front locker, because every dealer that I know for stock, for inventory purposes, they always check the box for the front locker. But if you are out there configuring your own and you're accidentally checking those option boxes and you forget one, just know that you can get it without that. The Grenadier, I would put a little bit below the capability of Bronco and Wrangler, depending on what you're doing, for a few reasons. The first one is the traction management software is just complete crap. It is not good at all. Like the traction control and stability control system in the Grenadier, not good. But the fact that it has a true mechanical locker means that when you're off-road, it doesn't actually matter at all, because you lock, you unlock, it's totally fine. You also have the ability to have the center in open diff mode, which is unique in this segment. You don't find it much in the competition, because very few vehicles that we're talking about here have a true center differential. The Grenadier is one of them. It actually has a true center differential, and you can have it open, you can have it locked, and you can have it open or locked in 4 high or 4 low. Got a lot of choices there. So very good capability, but the software, bad software. Wrangler has the benefit of having lockers, having good software, and being dimensionally very small if we're talking about the 2-door version. Now, obviously, that's why it's not great on-road. The handling ability on-road is going to be, not great. It's not going to tow nicely. The short wheelbase and on the 2-door model especially, it gets pushed around by trailers very, very hard. By the time we were talking about the Rubicon models, obviously you're giving up a lot of on-road prowess for that off-road capability, but that is its entire purpose, its entire being there. So that's kind of the order that I would rank those in. Let's see here. Will we revisit cars and assign letter scores? Find the handling, ride, and cabin scores would be super helpful, but it's not available for all cars reviewed. That is a good question. If we're reviewing them at a launch event, we don't normally do that, but we are always we're always trying to revitalize the website. We are still working on this plan. Hopefully that is something that we are going to be spending more time on this year, since I have more time at home to really work on those scores and the scoring rankings, etc., on the website. So that is probably where we're going to try and address this situation, especially since scores can change relative to other vehicles in the segment. So, if there's a new entry in the segment and the handling is fantastic, then it obviously should push others in the segment down. So the website is where we can make those kind of changes, since we can't make those changes to videos in advance. So move along here. Quick question. Here we go. Least a Sorento hybrid. Love the car. For some reason, the interior creaks and pops and the temperature changes inside. Should I be worried? I would not be worried. This is unfortunately something that can happen in vehicles. Generally speaking, the more expensive the vehicle, the less likely it is to happen. In a Sorento, it is a fairly inexpensive vehicle for its size. So these are some considerations that you may have to address. If it's a brand new one, you can always take it back to the dealer and say, hey, it's squeaking and cracking. Most likely it is because there is a trim panel piece inside that doesn't have a piece of foam or a little piece of tape here and there. There is a lot of foam going on and a lot of fuzzy tape going on in most modern vehicles. If you've ever taken apart panels in a new car, you'll notice that the way these interior panels are usually affixed to the body structure of the vehicle is they have these little push clips, these little metal clips that kind of look like this, and they push past and then they expand on the other side to retain the panel in. And then the mating surface, the face of that, will then have some fuzzy tape on it and maybe some foam inserts here and there, combinations of the two to try and keep those squeaks at bay. But they're always going to be plastics that are going to move here and there. And every vehicle is going to have some twist in it. It would be weird if it was not, if it was actually, firm. So you're always going to get a little bit of squeaking, but it's perfectly acceptable to take it back to the dealer, complain about it, and see if they can do anything with that. It may be something that they know about. Thoughts on the transverse Aisin 8-speed that seems to be used everywhere? I think it's a pretty decent transmission. It is certainly smooth. I think I like Honda's 10-speed automatic a bit more than the Aisin, but it's certainly less controversial than the 9-speed ZF transmission, and it's certainly less controversial than the dual clutch transmissions that some manufacturers are using instead in this segment. The downside to the Aisin 8-speed is that it doesn't seem to be able to handle as much torque as some manufacturers would really love to be able to put through that transmission, and size-wise, it is not as compact for its power capabilities as the ZF 9-speed, which is why we still find that 9-speed in so many vehicles out there. But I think it's a solid transmission. It's proved pretty reliable. We have a new version, of course, in the GR product line from Toyota. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't start seeing that tune with those very similar clutches and some of the very similar changes to the gear ratios in other vehicles at some point down the line. Subaru Solterra, we should be driving that relatively soon. I don't know exactly when, but pretty soon. Also, of course, the related Toyota BZ, that should be coming up pretty soon as well. Jay has a Veloster N1 and Ioniq 5N. I am torn on the range. I would say of the EVs that are out there currently that have low range, I would be the least worried about the Ioniq 5N because it charges so quickly. So you really can get a 10%, 80% charge in just 18 minutes and the full battery charge in under about 40 minutes or so. So because the charging is so quick, I'd be less concerned about range. Also, really sit down and think about how often you truly road trip and you truly are using more than about 180, 200 miles of range. If it's very often, maybe look at something else with a bigger battery pack. If it's really pretty rare, I don't think I would worry about it too much. The last twist there, of course, is that it depends on where you live and how much charging infrastructure there is in an area you live. And then tied with that, how often do you plan on using a Tesla charger on your Ioniq 5N? Because remember that generally speaking, with very limited exceptions, the supercharger network is a 400-volt network, and that means that it's really going to take a lot longer for your Ioniq to charge on a Tesla supercharger. You're going to be much better with the others. This is an easy one, hands down, the Volvo XC90 plug-in hybrid. It is so much smoother than the Mazda plug-in hybrid. You also get pretty solid range, better fuel economy, I think, in real-world driving. Everything about the Volvo plug-in hybrid I like better. Especially since you're not driving it too far there. I would go the Volvo. I was actually quite disappointed in the XC90 plug-in hybrid, if I'm honest. It's not as smooth or as refined as I hoped it would be, and I hope that Mazda can continue refining that over time. So let's move along here. Elizabeth is asking about an SUV. Is torn between a Forester and an Equinox. That is an interesting twist there. The Equinox, I like the look of. I think I like the look of the GMC a bit better, but I have to admit, I probably would buy a Forester hybrid. I think the Forester hybrid is just a really good balance of different priorities. I would probably go towards the Forester hybrid. Also worth looking at would be something like, and depending on how much room you needed, of course, something like the Sportage hybrid. Looks are subjective. I don't care for the exterior looks of the Tucson or the Sportage, but I do like the hybrid system and the interior design. The Nissan lacks the hybrid system. I don't know if I would go there unless you just really love the look, and it is pretty comfortable. Toyota's obviously the no-brainer there, easy to recommend. I would also look maybe towards a Sorento, because the Sorento is this weird twist between, or weird intermediary between a compact and a midsize. It is smaller outside than a Highlander, but about the same size on the inside. The cargo area and the optional use third row, because it's standard, but the third row should be considered optional use. It's not emergency, but it's not big either. But I like that use of space back there. And the price tag is only a little bit above average for a compact. It's $2,000 to $3,000 more than the average compact SUV, but a whopping $8,000 less than a Highlander. So it's this weird middle ground, which I actually really quite like. Let's move along here. Reliability issues seem to be an issue across all truck brands, which is true. Although we have to back up here and say, part of the reason it appears that reliability is less than average in a truck seems to be because of the way people use trucks. And this is an important consideration. So this also explains some of the reliability issues that we see in other vehicles. If you're in a RAV4 with all-wheel drive, you can't lock a center coupling because it doesn't have a lockable center coupling. There's no such thing as a rear locker. The tow ratings are lower, etc. There are fewer bells and whistles on this thing. If you look even at a Toyota Tundra, you have a 2-speed transfer case available that actually locks. You have a rear locker. You have an available hybrid system. You have twin turbos, etc. All of these features can breed unreliability because there's simply more to go wrong in this truck. And that gets amplified further when we look at the American truck brands that offer even more, automatic engaging 4-wheel drive. We have torque variable split 4-wheel drive systems with an active transfer case. You can even get front lockers in some of the trucks, etc. So all these things add to the reliability issues. For instance, if you're in a Tundra and you lock your transfer case inappropriately because, you didn't listen to any warnings and you think to yourself, oh, it's raining, so I'm going to put my transfer case in 4 high. Bad idea. Don't do that, because you're locking the input shafts of the front and rear differentials, and you're creating a lot more internal stress on those components. Then something fails, you take it to your dealer and you argue, that's going to be one of those reliability issues that's going to show up in some of these data points. So those are all factors in amongst that. If I were to buy a truck myself today, I have to admit I would be pretty torn. I like the feature functionality that we find in the Ram lineup and the styling and the comfort level we find in the Ram lineup, but their pricing's got a little out of control. I like that they brought the Hemi back, but again, pricing a little out of control. They do have a long warranty, though. So if you're worried about this, Ram just did the 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty. Let me see. I want to look this up because I believe it covers... 5-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty, not 10-year. It's for 2026. It will be 10 years, 100,000 miles. The weird twist there is it also is including the 3/4 ton and 1 ton trucks in their powertrain warranty. So that could help abate some concerns. I really like the GM inline 6 diesel in their trucks. And so I probably would lean towards a GMC with the inline six diesel. I think that's a great combo. I also like the tailgate in that model. Very, very handy in the Chevy trucks and the GMC trucks. The corollaries just aren't as useful. The silly barn doors in the Ram feel like all the good designs were gone, and so they were let's barn some doors. Ditto the Ford, weird center thing. I don't think that's useful at all. Let's move along here. This is a good demographic question. I think she probably will, because the structure of America hasn't changed. And for every generation where we have been told this generation is not going to drive, that generation is not going to drive, lo and behold, they eventually do drive. My generation was lauded, in the news. There were all sorts of news stories about, this generation, they're not going to drive. They didn't want their driver's license. I delayed getting my driver's license until I was 18. That was simply because I was able to get a new computer out of my parents. And I was like, hey, instead of paying for 2 years worth of actually, it wasn't even 2 years. It's like 18 months worth of car insurance. I got it at 17. That's what it was. Anyway, instead of paying for a year of car insurance, why don't you get me a new computer instead? And we'll push this back a year. And I think a lot of millennials, of course, were blamed for this too. They were doing very similar things. They wanted a new phone. They wanted a new whatever. But then push comes to shove. They graduate high school, get a job, graduate college, get a job. And then guess what? In America, by and large, you need a car, because in order to get to this office from where everybody lives, you could take public transit. It's not great, but taking public transit from where I live would be a massive hike, and it would probably take more than a day to actually get out and get to a bus. So definitely a problem there. When do we think Honda will give us an all-new Odyssey, at least a hybrid? That's a good question. I'm not going to bet anything on that one, because Honda hasn't even given us a new Ridgeline, so I'm guessing the Odyssey is lower on that list. Let's move on here. Someone was asking a question about a plug-in hybrid that I have completely forgotten to answer. Here we go. R1S or EX90. I like the R1S and I like the EX90 both, but I think I lean a little bit more towards the R1S. It's a little bit roomier on the inside. It's also a little bit more novel. But of course, if you love CarPlay, EX90 is the way to go there. And I like the refinement of the EX90. I think it drives a little bit better. It's, of course, going to have a more normal dealer experience, etc. But a lot of this is really going to come down to dealership and what kind of ownership experience you want there. Let's move back down to some of the newer comments here. Why is hybrid technology taking so long to come from GM, Nissan, Volkswagen, etc., especially when they used to have hybrids at one point? This is a good point. Good question here. Well, Nissan, their hybrid system efforts have frankly been bad. Let's just put that on the board. So Rogue hybrid, bad. It worked, and the fuel economy was an improvement, but it didn't solve some of the hybrid things that are solved with a Honda hybrid or a Toyota hybrid or a Chrysler hybrid or a GM hybrid, actually, to be honest, which is the simplification of the drivetrain. So intrinsically, the reason that a Toyota hybrid system is so reliable and so smooth is because it's really mechanically simple. The Nissan system, they just jammed an electric motor in there and didn't really change much else. So it wasn't any less complex than the others, and it had some reliability issues and stumbles, etc. Similar for Volkswagen and their earlier attempts at hybridization. GM, on the other hand, their reason is simply that they have really saddled on to the electric transition. And so they said, well, instead of dedicating these specific resources for motor production, battery production, etc., to a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid, we're just going to make gas vehicles, simplify and streamline the production for this platform so that it's not really hybridized. And then we will make electric vehicles over here for the people that want something different. And they just really shifted that. They also then closed down a lot of the production capability for hybrid systems in the US and really ramped things up in China. But it hasn't. I think it was a misstep by them, and they're trying to dial it back, but it's going to take a while for that to come back. On the why are certain brands axing hybrids on Explorer and Aviator? For Ford, that's also a production thing, and they're pushing those hybrid systems into fleet vehicles, the Fleet Explorer, as well as the F-150 hybrid. F-150 hybrid's been doing quite well, and they can only build a certain number of hybrids, so it seems like they're being delicate as to where they're putting their hybrid resources. I would assume they probably just need to bump that factory up and start producing more hybrid components. So that's there. Most miles I have put on a personal vehicle. Let's see, probably around 150,000 miles or so myself. Communal vehicles, a lot less than that. My highest mileage vehicle currently is at 238,000. 258,000 miles, somewhere around there. That's my WJ Grand Cherokee. I didn't put all the miles on it myself, though. My parents put the first 190,000 miles on it, 200,000 miles maybe on it, and I put the rest on the WJ. It's my yard car, so it doesn't really move much. Right now, hours on the engine are probably more critical than the miles on it, because it basically just moves from here to there and either powers an air compressor, powers a 3,000 watt inverter, or the boom sprayer. We use it for agricultural spraying. It's basically a tractor, towing the chipper around here and there, jump starting things, that kind of thing. It's kind of, it's real rough. Let's move on here. Have a 2013 Elantra GT, shopping for something newer, looking for Crosstrek, Taos, Corolla Cross Hybrid, Honda Civic Hatch Hybrid. I'm guessing you meant 2025 instead of 2015 there, because we didn't have a Honda Civic Hatch Hybrid in 2015. I would probably lean towards the Civic Hatch Hybrid because it's just a lot of fun. If you wanted something boxier and more practical, I probably would go for Taos. The Corolla Cross Hybrid is just a little on the boring side to me. Let's move on to our super chat here. Thanks for that. What are our thoughts on a used 2019 e-tron? I think they are fantastic deals. The depreciation on them is absolutely epic. And as you point out, the range, not great. But the AC charging, I think, is the bigger reality and the bigger consideration here. Most people are going to be AC charging all the time. I don't think it's that big of a deal. They're so cheap. That is the main thing. They have seemingly still are getting decent support from Audi dealers. There's not too much to go wrong on them. There were some teething troubles. My memory is a little bad on the exact electronics issues, but I believe there were some early onboard charger issues. So you want to make sure that yours doesn't have any of the known problems on your particular model. But I wouldn't be necessarily scared at all by those. So I'd probably go for something along those lines. Yeah. So at any rate, let us know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. Find us over Facebook, all that, etc. We'll follow you back up before we actually split here. So the last question, guys, why do I like them? I like the ride quality in the e-tron because they're really comfy and they're big. And they were in this weird era where obviously it's Tesla. So Tesla's creating SUVs over here on the side, and EVs over here on the side, and other manufacturers are like, oh, we need an SUV that's an EV. And so various manufacturers picked different segments to compete in. Audi tried it with the e-tron, Jaguar with the e-Pace, of course, or I-Pace. But and even though they were always compared with one another, they were quite different vehicles. The e-tron was always relatively large. It's a big two-row, so more like a base Model X than a Model Y. And the I-Pace was always quite small. So honestly, kind of expensive Volvo XC40, competitor, because it's really quite tight inside. And I think that some of these comparisons disadvantaged these vehicles. E-tron was accused of being too expensive and too slow and too this and too soft and whatever. But a lot of those comparisons were comparing it to Model Y, which was a very different kind of vehicle designed for a different kind of customer. So I think that the softness, the quietness of the e-tron was always attractive to me. Depending on the generation, there was the tri-motor version of that platform that I think also it was really quite novel in an era where other manufacturers weren't trying multi-motor EVs there. Kind of tied with this, it's one of the reasons I like the e-tron that doesn't have really terribly huge wheels on it. Manufacturers don't want to go back to smaller wheels for a bunch of different reasons, but big brakes are one of them. You can't put big meaty brakes behind small wheels. The disc brake revolution, I guess, is part of this as well, because previously we had relatively small disc brakes. A lot of vehicles were still drum braked in other world markets, which is why those could have even smaller wheels, because you can actually stick really quite small wheels on a car with drum brakes. But big disc brakes, big reason there. If you want 2, 3, 4 calipers, 6 calipers, 8 pistons. If you want 4 piston, 6 piston, 8 piston, 10 piston brakes, is huge things. You really end up needing to have big wheels on these vehicles. People also really like the look of them. It improves handling. It does have seemingly a minor impact on braking scores sometimes due to the stiffness of the tire combo there. But improving roadways, I know it doesn't seem like that, but the reality is that roadways have improved greatly in the United States over decades and decades, potholes on freeways notwithstanding. And the lack of rural purchase of new cars is a consideration here too. By and large, American car shoppers, high percentages here, we're talking, not exclusively, but high percentages, are suburban dwelling, upper income earning, multi-car households that own their own home. And that is why when you look at the cars that are being designed for America now, they're not inexpensive. They're no discount cars. They are not really focused at rural America, even though they may want to give this vibe of country cowboy with the pickup trucks. The vast majority of pickup trucks are sold to suburbanites. They are not sold to people that actually do truck things with the truck, which is also why we find trucks with such little beds and such big cabs and this growth of the truck persona. We do not see the explosion in truck sales in the United States because that many more people went out and bought a ranch on the weekend. It's because the trucks have taken the place of the Camry, the Taurus, the Malibu, insert every midsize and full-size sedan you can think of in this sentence. And that's why we have the trucks in the format that we have now. So with that out of the way, thanks everybody for this quick impromptu live stream. I have to stick a bottle in the baby here before she screams because it's been 3 hours. So see all of you later.